Welcome to this episode, the Catechetical Corner, handing on and defending the faith. One of the most humble and overlooked figures in the history of humanity is Saint Joseph, the foster father of Jesus and head of the Holy Family. He entrusted his family, himself, and the constant unknowns they faced into the hands of the divine providence of God. Whether it was the unexpected pregnancy of his bride, who had taken a vow of consecrated virginity, the struggle to find room in the inn on the night of Jesus' birth, or the challenge of surrendering control of a situation he could not fix while fleeing with Mary and Jesus into Egypt to avoid the wrath of King Herod, his quiet obedience, interior peace, and faithful service bore him the title of head of the Holy Family. In this episode, Father Bryce Sibley, priest of the Diocese of Lafayette, begins a three-part reflection into the interior life and everyday person chosen to be the chaste guardian of the Virgin and pillar of families in this year of St. Joseph.
And that's what I want to do in addressing today, one specific mystery in the life of St. Joseph, because this time of anxiety, I think, is a perfect time for us to focus on, in our diocese and throughout the church, St. Joseph as a patron for these times of unplanned chaos, of anxiety. Why? Because if we focus on the mystery of Christ's birth and St. Joseph's participation in it, we're going to see that nothing went as planned. Nothing went as I am sure Joseph would have expected it. Well, first of all, if we pay attention to the scriptures, that Joseph and Mary were traveling. They were not at home because of the census. And so whenever the time for Mary's birth came, there was no family, there were no friends. They weren't where they could have just gone to their own home and had safety and comfort. They had to find some place. And so they went looking around, but as we know, they went to the inn and there was no room for them there. You might imagine that St. Joseph, being human and not immaculately conceived, maybe was a little frustrated, particularly because of his care for Mary and the child that she was expecting. And so St. Joseph had to improvise. He had to come up with another plan. He had to search around. And what did he find? He found the stable. And so, with all the animals around, probably didn't smell all that great, not what he had envisioned or planned. They took the little manger, Mary gave birth, and they improvised. And the Son of God was born into the world on that night. A lot of other things happened, but of course, how does it seem to end? With Herod wanting to kill his child. So all of a sudden they have to pick up and go all the way to another country. Nothing went as planned over this period of time. And so you can imagine that Joseph, still filled with faith, quite possibly would have asked himself or asked God, what is your plan? What is going on here? Why is everything falling apart? Is God really in control of all of this? Is this how the Messiah is going to come into the world? Is this how we're going to find salvation? Because it surely doesn't seem like it. Lord, cut me some slack. I'm trying to do my best here, but nothing is going the way that I would have expected. And even anxiety maybe, St. Joseph feeling a little bit about what's going to come next. While he trusted, certainly, that God was going to provide, he didn't have all the answers. And so Pope Francis, in reflecting on the Nativity and the life of St. Joseph, says this: often in life, things happen whose meaning we do not understand. Our first reaction is frequently one of disappointment and rebellion. Joseph set aside his own ideas in order to accept the course of events and, mysterious as they seemed, to embrace them, take responsibility for them, and make them part of his own history. Unless we are reconciled with our own history, we will be unable to take a single step forward. For we will always remain hostage to our expectations and the disappointments that follow. The spiritual path that Joseph traces for us is not one that explains, but accepts. Only as a result of this acceptance, this reconciliation, can we begin to glimpse a broader history, a deeper meaning. And first, and I think the most essential little sentence or phrase here, is when he talks about the temptation we have to remain hostage to our expectations and the disappointments that follow. So many of us had expectations of how we thought the year was going to go. So many of us have expectations of how we think our month or our week or our day is going to go. Expectations of what's going to happen at work, expectations of what school's going to be like, expectations of how things are going to happen in our family. And the truth is, we can all attest to it, reality never lives up to our expectations. Never. And so what happens is we end up becoming tremendously disappointed. And we can get caught in our heads ruminating and thinking about it. Why didn't it go the way I planned? Why did it fail? Am I a failure? What's going to happen in the future? And sometimes really becoming frustrated. Frustrated with ourselves, frustrated with others, but most disturbingly frustrated with God. Even as he said, leading to rebellion. Things didn't go as I expected to. God doesn't care for me. And it can lead to people really feeling alienated from the Lord. So how do we overcome this? How do we overcome the disappointment that comes from reality or the present moment not living up to our expectations? And I can sort of phrase it in a way that I think sums it up effectively. That we can give up having expectations. We can give up expectations and instead have an expectant attitude. Expectations are very, very specific. That we expect things to happen our way, in a way that maybe we want to control it. Or we put God in a little box and we say, God, you are going to act in this way. This is how I expect you to act. But the truth is, we all know that God is not going to act in the box that we put up for him. Quite often, the way he acts confounds our own expectations. And so we got to put away these very specific things that we have. Put away expectations. Not becoming apathetic and not really caring about anything or thinking that God doesn't care about us. That's not what I'm advocating at all. But instead, I'm advocating an expectant attitude. Expectant, that we expect and have an expectant attitude that the Lord loves us, that he is a loving Father and he wants to provide for us and is going to give us good. And even if the cross comes, it becomes a necessary trial for our purification. And that he is going to act to defend us and that he is going to provide us. And so there's an attitude of faith, an attitude of hope that we cultivate in our hearts, that attitude of expectancy, of expectant hope, that no matter what happens, the Lord is on our side. And even though we may not understand it, it may not make sense to us, that indeed he is in control. And so Pope Francis, a little bit later, talks about, in regards to this acceptance of reality, of embracing our own history, Christian realism. Christian realism means that we are realistic about the world. We're realistic about the good and the bad present there, not having expectations or not having some idealistic, romantic way that we think things are going to turn out. We accept reality as it presents itself to us. We don't want to impose our own ideas or categories on reality in the ways that we think things should happen, the ways we think God should act in our lives. So ultimately, we allow God and His will to reveal itself to us when? In the present moment, here and now. God is not present in the past. He's not present in the future. He's present here and now. It's what we call the practice of the present moment, to see the Lord's will manifested in the present moment. Now, it may not be His deliberate will where He chooses it, but it's at least His permissive will. And so it takes, as Pope Francis says also in his letter, courage. Courage to face reality and to accept it, particularly when things do not go our way. When the cross comes, when we face persecution, when we feel that God has abandoned us. We got to realize that He hasn't, but we have to use our ingenuity and our courage to adapt to the situation. That's what St. Joseph did. He didn't say, oh my goodness, there's no room at the inn, and just despair. He said, I got to figure something out. You got to make do with what he had. He's like MacGyver back in the times of the Bible. Hey, if any of you remember that, he took what he had and he made do. A little pop culture reference for y'all today. No laughs, but that's how it goes. But he had to improvise. And I'm sure he said, Mary, I wish I had something better for you. But this is all I have. Fortunately, Mary never complained. She was always happy. So everything was good. But he improvised. He made do with what he had. He didn't complain and wish things were different. He took ownership. And I think that's the real word. When we accept reality as it comes to us, when we live in the present moment, without giving up our expectations, but having an expectant attitude, we take ownership of our own path. We take ownership of our own history, not pulling it away from God, but realizing that He does act in it, but yet He wants us to make choices. Now, I work with young people, college-age students. I've been doing it for 11 years now, and I see in them a great fear to make a decision, a great fear to commit to something, because of the fear that they may get it wrong. They may make the wrong decision. They're going to mess up somehow. And the truth is, I try to communicate to them is the same truth that I want to communicate here. God is not interested in micromanaging your life. He doesn't care what cereal you eat. He doesn't care what you listen to on the radio. Well, He might care about that. Some stuff you probably shouldn't be listening to. But He gives you freedom. He trusts you. There are certain things He clearly will have a will on, but He didn't tell Joseph, Joseph, I need you to go and find this stable, and I need you to clear out a place. He let Joseph decide. Why? Because He trusted Joseph. In the same way, God trusts us to make decisions. And guess what? Sometimes we're going to make the wrong decisions. But as long as we have that good will and we're trying to do God's will, He's okay with it. And so we have to come to terms with our own imperfections. And this is it, making choices, adapting, always wanting to do God's will. It's a sign of maturity that we can do that we can let go of expectations, accept reality, and embrace the choices that the Lord entrusts to us. Granted, we need prudence, we need prayer to figure out what the right thing to do is, but we cannot maintain an attitude of being hostage to our expectations. We've got to set ourselves free. We have to let the Lord set us free. Now, if we accept reality as it is, just like Joseph did, we improvise, we make do, we accept it as a will coming to us in the present moment, this does not mean that we're going to understand it all. This does not mean that God's going to explain everything He's doing, what's going to come next, or why He is doing it. And so what happens is, I see a lot of times things don't go as planned. There's evil in the world. Mistakes are made. And people want an explanation. Why did God allow this? What is He trying to do? What is His plan? in my life, in the church, in the world? Where is this all going? They want to be able to understand. And we, as humans, have a natural desire to understand. And there are certain elements of why things happen the way they do that we can't understand. But a perfect grasp of God's plan is something that we will never have, that we will never fully understand. But that's what happens. People say, if I could understand, then I could accept it. It wouldn't be so bad. I could accept reality if I could understand it. The thing is, St. Joseph, if we look at him, didn't ask for explanations. Didn't ask for, hey, tell me what's going to happen next. Tell me, God, why you're allowing this to happen. He accepted it. He accepted what the Lord asked him to do in the different dreams or when the angel spoke to him. And he accepted things when God did not give him clear guidance. Because as a just man of faith, he had a deep, deep trust in God. And again, I can imagine, we're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, when all of a sudden the shepherds show up and these wise men, Joseph is like, what in the world is going on here? Where are these people coming from? What's going on? Why are they bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh? But he accepted it, prayed, hopefully, that he could get a deeper understanding, but he didn't have to understand. In the same way Mary didn't. Mary didn't say, I'll do everything you want me to do, Lord. I'll do your will, but you got to explain to me what it's going to entail. He said yes in the same way, even though he maybe didn't fully understand the part he was playing in salvation history. And so this desire for us to be able to understand what God's will is, what his plan is, where things are going whenever things don't go as planned, and whenever we struggle with accepting reality, is really nothing more than a desire to control. If I can understand it, I can control it. One of my favorite spiritual authors, many of you may know who he is, Father Jacques Philippe. He wrote a number of different books. In this book, which is one of his great ones called Interior Freedom, he says, the desire to understand God's will may also spring from another source that is far from pure, insecurity. In this case, understanding means reassuring ourselves, seeking security in the sense that we can control the situation if we can understand it. So when things don't go as planned, guess what? We don't feel safe. We don't feel secure. And so we grasp at something. And one of the things that we like to grasp at is understanding. Now, we're not advocating here for blind trust. God, I blindly trust you. Not at all. Our faith ought to seek understanding. We're talking about in the life of St. Joseph and in our own lives, a filial trust. The trust of a son to a father who knows the father, loves the son, and wants what's good for the child, and would never give him a snake when he asks for bread. And so, even though he may not understand the father's ways, why he does what he does, because of that relationship, he trusts. But the truth is, we are not going to be able to trust if we don't have a relation. And we're not going to have a relationship if we don't pray. If we don't cultivate a relation with him by spending time with the Lord every single day. Not just reciting prayers, but really coming to an encounter with him. That would be the topic of a whole other retreat of how we can grow in prayer. But Joseph was a man of prayer. He did listen to his interior promptings. He did know God is one who was going to provide for him. And so, does that mean we may never understand why bad things happen, why things don't go as planned? In the next life we will. We're going to see how it all fits together. But the truth is, we can get glimpses of it in this life. But the problem is, it often doesn't happen in the moment that things aren't going as planned. It may happen months, years, decades later. When we look back at our lives and say, oh, this thing happened that didn't go as planned, But if it would have gone as planned, I wouldn't be where I am today. We can all review our own lives and take some time to reflect and see instances of that. So in the same way, why is the Lord allowing all the insanity going on in our world? Besides the fact that he respects human freedom, is there some other bigger reason? Possibly. That we may never fully know, or at least not until many years down the line when we see the pieces of the tapestry and how they weave together. So this prayerful acceptance of God's will, of giving up the effort of the demand to control and understand, but living in the present moment and taking ownership of our own history as Joseph did, even when things go wrong, is the path and the key to finding inner peace. And I think this really is the key point or the ultimate point here. Whenever things seem to be falling down around us, when things aren't going the way we had hoped, it's only if we can do this that we can find inner peace. You all know the serenity prayer, the different versions of it. The one that most of us know comes from the 12-step programs. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So it's not just sitting back and saying, everything is going to happen as God's will. No, we need to be able to act, but we need the courage and the discernment to know when to act. But whenever we cannot change things, whenever we don't understand, we can still keep peace and serenity. We don't need to be ruled by anxiety. Anxiety which often flows from getting trapped in our heads, worrying about the future or beating ourselves up for mistakes that happened in the past. Joseph didn't have time to do that. Mary didn't have time nor the inclination to do that. But if we can cultivate this attitude of acceptance, of imitating St. Joseph, then in the midst of the storm around us, we can experience real peace, and not be raked by anxiety. And hopefully in our lives, we've all met certain individuals who are like that. It's not a peace that comes from some earthly source or some medication, as necessary as that might be at times, but a peace that comes from the Lord. A peace that marks an individual out as one who trusts in God. And so, as imperfect as he was, because St. Joseph was not immaculately conceived, Joseph was a man, I believe, of great interior peace. Maybe not right at the beginning. He probably had to learn it over time, and I'm sure, quite possibly, he learned a lot of it from Mary. Over the years that he lived with her, as they were raising Jesus, the 30 years, he learned that attitude from Mary. And so, Mary, as we'll talk about, left her mark on Joseph just like she left on Jesus. Because Mary, right at the beginning, because of her sinlessness, was able to say when the angel came to her, even though she didn't understand, even though she had some fear, fiat, be it done to me according to thy word. I accept your will, and whatever is going to come, I don't need an explanation for it. I trust that Joseph's going to take care of me. I trust you've got this under control. I'm just happy to be a part of your plan. An excitement, a desire to be the mother of the Messiah and to see salvation brought to Israel. And so Joseph had his own fiat, his own, be it done unto me according to thy word. And I'm sure during these difficult times, Mary was there to support him, to say, we can do this, Joseph. It's all right. We're going to be able to figure this out. The Lord's going to take care of us. Imagine the encouragement Joseph had from his relationship with Mary. Mary's ability to say yes to God's will when things were easy, but also when things were not easy. Particularly at the foot of the cross, when things really didn't make sense. when things seemed to be falling apart, when it appeared that her son was failing. And she didn't fully grasp what was going on. She had to act in faith. Mary had faith. When she found herself, as one theologian mystic calls, the state of no longer being able. We've all been in that. When we see things not going as planned, when we see people that we love suffering, when we see our plans falling down around us, and there's nothing we can do. We can't fix it. We can't understand it. We can't make it better. We've just got to be able to sit there and say, Lord, my sacrifice is not being able to do anything. But still, somehow, maintaining peace and a great faith. Mary was able to do it on the foot of the cross and through the rest of her life. And so a little hint too. St. Joseph did what he could. He adapted to the situation, but there was a lot that he wasn't able to do. To understand, to be able to fix the problems, to be able to demand a room at the inn, to be able to do all he wanted to do. But yet he was able to find peace in that because of his fiat, because of his willingness to accept reality as it presented it to him. And I think it's Mary's example, and over the course of his life, the love that she had for him that left an imprint on his heart, just as she left an imprint on Jesus' heart and on John's heart. That Joseph was able to do this and grow in his ability to do this because of his companionship with Mary.
St. Francis de Sales once wrote the following about St. Joseph. It was necessary that divine providence should commit Mary to the charge and guardianship of a man who was so absolutely pure. That quote from that amazing saint comes from Father Don Calloway's book called The Consecration to St. Joseph. He is indeed the model of all fatherhood, and without him, no husband, father, or priest will ever fully understand what it means to be a sacrificial man, a sacrificial husband, a sacrificial father, or a truly masculine saint. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Catechetical Corner, and join us next time as Father Bryce Sibley, priest of the Diocese of Lafayette, shares some interior reflections of the heart of St. Joseph during the presentation of Christ in the temple. God love you, and we'll see you next time.